I think the work that I'm going to talk about today really follows up on the exact problems that were highlighted in both of the sessions up until now. And I am a professor at the University of Virginia, and for the past 10 or so years, most of my work has been in partnerships with states. And so I work a lot with the Department of Education in Louisiana and the Department of Education in Virginia. And the findings I'm going to show you today are from both of those contexts, with a focus on Virginia, where I think we have tried something pretty exciting as far as actually trying to get some movement on solving some of these problems, or at least a proof of concept that states can make progress on these compensation issues and on quality. So let's see. All right, so I think we've talked a lot about the low wages that early childhood educators face, and you've seen sort of statistics about that, about the working conditions. And one of the things that leads to, aside from it being a very, very difficult job for the women in the job themselves, is that teachers are often leaving their sites at extremely high rates. And so what that means is oftentimes in early childhood programs, teachers are there for a very short time, and that has a lot of negative implications for quality. And the reason it's negative for quality is, first, young kids thrive and learn the most through close relationships with adults and caregivers and forming bonds. And so when teachers are leaving at high rates, which is not very surprising when they are working at very low wage jobs, that compromises just the teacher-child interactions, which are kind of the heart of high quality early childhood. But the other thing that's happening is state leaders like you are making investments in early childhood quality improvements. And so these are going to be coaching and professional development and curriculum investments, and a teacher goes to those training. And if that teacher leaves a few months or weeks after that training, that investment has pretty much walked away with them. And so the turnover in early childhood is a really serious problem, and something that I've been working on studying for a long time. And as others have highlighted today, one of the challenges is that we don't have great data on this workforce. In K-12, we collect a ton of data on early educators, so it's very easy to know how much teachers turn over and where they go and how much they move from one school to another, or which schools they move to. In early childhood, we rarely have the data that allows us to do that. So one of the things I wanted to tell you about is the work we've been doing in Louisiana, where we've collected data on every single teacher working in a publicly funded early childhood program. So these are teachers working in pre-K programs, but also Head Starts programs, childcare programs, etc. And one of the things we've been able to see from that is just how serious this instability problem is in early childhood. So this is data from Louisiana. And what that first purple bar is showing you is that almost 2 in 5 teachers, lead teachers in these early childhood programs that we see one fall, are no longer there the following fall. So about 40% of teachers working in early childhood leave their site before the next year, which is a really staggering rate of turnover if you think about young children and how much they rely on their early educators. But the other thing to note is that when you look at these 3 other bars, we've broken this up across the 3 main sectors that folks have been talking to you about today. So pre-K programs in the public schools, Head Start programs, and then childcare, publicly funded childcare centers. And what you can see is that in childcare centers, the turnover rates are even more staggering. So in Louisiana, half of all the teachers working in publicly funded childcare centers 1 year are gone by the following year. And that is pre-COVID, pre-pandemic, and has only gotten exacerbated. And so when you have half of your childcare teachers leaving from 1 year to the next, it is very hard for us to say we are providing high quality early childhood opportunities at scale, and it is very hard to improve that quality. Now, there are many reasons why turnover might be so high, but obviously after all the presentations you've watched so far today, one candidate explanation is going to be the compensation. So I showed you that childcare teachers are turning over at way higher rates than early childhood educators working in public schools. And this is just data, again, from Louisiana, showing the pay of early educators. And the striking thing is we see these middle bars here for childcare, which are the assistant and lead teachers. And you can see that their mean annual earnings for the lead teachers in childcare centers is just under $20,000 a year. In Louisiana, for pre-K teachers working in the public schools, that rate is twice as high, about $40,000. So when you have teachers working kind of equally complex jobs, tiring, exhausting jobs, in some ways even harder jobs in childcare because they don't tend to have summers off and they tend to work longer hours, but you're paying them at half the rate, it is not necessarily surprising that you would see these very high rates of turnover, which, like I said, was about half the teachers leaving from one year to the next. So a lot of my work has been around kind of documenting these disparities, but recently I had the opportunity to work with a state partner to actually try to address some of these disparities. And so I wanted to tell you a little bit about Virginia's teacher recognition program, which was a new program. In 2019, Virginia received a preschool development grant, which is a federal grant, birth to 5. It was a $10 million grant. And when they announced the grant, they said nearly half of the federal funds will directly support innovative early educators. And at the time, I wasn't sure exactly what that meant, but it said nearly $4 million of this funding will directly support early childhood educators to accelerate the implementation of higher standards, reduce turnover. And the idea was, let's give early educators this money directly, and not necessarily for taking on more, but just in sort of recognition of how hard the work is, how much we're asking of them, and how low the compensation is. So the general idea was like, we're just going to give these teachers money. Now, that was our partner's idea. We had to move super fast because the federal grants, when the PDG started, were just for 1 year. So we had these $10 million and you had to spend them down very, very fast. The idea was, could this money help improve well-being, teacher-child interactions, job satisfaction, and ultimately reduce this turnover problem so teachers stay longer? And we had to decide all these things really fast, like how much money would we give each individual teacher and who would be eligible and what would we do? So who gets the incentive and how large are they? And all these complicated questions. But I am a researcher and I was really fortunate to be at the table. And so when all these decisions were getting made, what I wanted to know is, can we not just do it? Can we do it and study it in a way that at the end we can tell you exactly how much of a difference it made? Like, did it matter to give teachers these dollars and how much did it matter? And fortunately, I have a wonderful partnership with the Chief School Readiness Officer for the state of Virginia, and we convinced her to give it a shot and set this up as an experiment. So here's what we did. We were going to give teachers $1,500 as financial incentives, and the only thing you had to do to get the $1,500 was stay at your site. So we were looking at a fairly compacted period of time. Altogether, it was going to be about 8 months. And if you stayed at your site, at the 3 months point, we gave you $500. And if you were still there 3 months later, $500 more. And if you were still there at the end, we gave you $500 more, up to $1,500. And anyone could get this: teachers, assistant teachers, aides, staff, anyone working with kids 0 to 5 full time. So 30 hours a week or more. And again, this was childcare centers, Head Starts, pre-Ks, the whole kind of publicly funded system. And initially, we had 25 Virginia communities participating, and we had enough resources to give this to all their teachers. But at the end, a very large urban county in Virginia asked to participate, and there wasn't enough money for all of them. Like, we could not include all of them. And when we get to situations where you have scarce resources and can't give them to everyone, that is a moment where we say, okay, let's do it by lottery and just sort of randomly assign some sites to receive this and some sites not. And that's what allowed us to really test what happens when you give early educators these kind of relatively small $1,500 payments and track what happens. So the question was, what is the impact of offering teachers this $1,500 incentive on the likelihood that they stay at their site? We had 75 sites and just under 600 teachers as part of the study. And we basically sort of by lottery assigned some of them to have access to this program and some of them not. And like I said, it was either these 3 payments of $500 or the people in the control group did not receive it. So let me show you quickly what we learned. First, this light blue bar you see up here shows you that overall, when we look at everyone in our study that did not get the funds, 75% of them were left when we looked at who was still there 8 months later. So in an 8-month period, a quarter of the early educators that were there just at the start of this study were no longer there. So that's just to highlight that turnover is very, very high. And here's what happened in the community, in the sites that received the money. There, 86% of the teachers were there. So meaning we increased the likelihood that teachers stayed at their sites by 11 percentage points. Now this result is everybody. This is all the teachers across all the different programs. But if you were paying attention in the earlier presentations, there are huge differences between childcare, Head Start, and pre-K in how much they're getting paid. So we might think that this would matter a lot more for the women working in childcare centers whose wages are much, much lower. And we tested that. So now these light blue bars are showing you what did this look like for childcare centers and what did it look like for schools. And you can see that in schools, there wasn't very much turnover for the group that didn't get it in the first place. Like almost all teachers were there 8 months later anyway, 94% of them stayed. But in childcare centers, fully 30% of the teachers were gone 8 months later. So very high rates of teacher turnover. And this is what our experiment did. So you can see that for the school-based teachers who are already getting paid quite a bit more, it made no difference at all. The retention rates were exactly the same. But what we did for childcare centers is we basically cut turnover in half. Whereas in the control group, 30% of teachers were gone. In the group that got $1,500, the offer of it, only 15% were gone, meaning half the teachers. When we asked the teachers what they used this money for, like how did it matter to them, what would they do? The most common response, 83% of teachers said we used this money. They were allowed to use it for anything, but they used it for housing, for food, and for bills. So for very, very basic needs. The second most common thing teachers said was paying off debts, student loans, credit cards. So we have a workforce who is struggling with very, very basic needs. And what we were able to show is that with $1,500, we were able to really significantly change their ability to manage those stressors and in turn significantly increase the likelihood they were still at their site, which we can posit would then help kids form longer relationships, help teachers improve and really stay in the profession longest. So I wanted to close with a quote from one of our early educators. They wrote, "Early educators are so often left out of the conversation when it comes to teaching. This grant has shown us that our work matters. I am hopeful that one day being respected and recognized for what we do will be a norm in our society." You know, I think we were really, really excited. We thought the money would matter, but we didn't think going into it, it would matter as much as it did. And that such a small payment could have such a large impact on the childcare workforce. And I wanted to share that because we embedded the research, our partner here at the governor's office and at the Department of Ed was able to take that to session and to argue for expansions of funding. And even during COVID, where we were very, very tight on budgets, we actually expanded matching the federal investment with a state investment so that we could give the same recognition program to more teachers, up it from $1,500 to $2,000, and are now working to expand it to go statewide. And so just an example of how you can leverage resources, how even small resources are a start and can make a big difference for the lives of these women, but also for the quality of these sites and for the children they serve. So I will stop there. Our website is on the slide, if that's helpful, and my email address if anyone has questions, and I'm also happy to answer them here. Thank you.